We are 2 weeks out from Easter, so I want to encourage you to think of someone in your sphere of influence who you think would resonate with what we do here at Unity, and invite them to check us out. If they can't do it on Easter, just invite them to check us out at some point. But like I said, Easter, of course, is a time when people who don't go into any spiritual center or church for the rest of the year seek out something on that particular day, just to connect. So keep that in mind as in the coming weeks here. Just follow your intuition as to who to say something to about coming to Unity. So good morning. There is a Unity minister named Jim who lived near Kansas City. And of course, in Kansas City, you've got the 4 seasons of the year. But he decided on his property to build 2 lily ponds. So he got, the plastic liners and stuff and worked on it and, filled them with water. And he decided to get some goldfish and put some goldfish in the water. One thing he hadn't really thought through, though, were his 2 dogs. And his 2 dogs would go running across the ponds and punctured the liners and stuff like that, so wouldn't hold the water very well. So Jim decided to gather the goldfish, and end up giving them away, and just kind of let the lily ponds go because by that point it was close to autumn, and he figured, not worth putting a lot of effort into them right now. So he figured he'd wait until the spring. So of course, typical winter up there in the Midwest, just snow, freezing, all of that stuff. And then as things began to get nicer, it was near the end of March, and Jim came home on a Sunday, and he just had this feeling that he should go out to the drained ponds. So he went out and he's thinking, I guess I could look them over, see if what changes I wanted to make. And he's looking over the one pond, and he had a smaller one farther down. Something caught his eye. It was like the sunlight gleamed on it, and what he saw was a little orange something. And he went up and he sees in this, he says, it wasn't even so much water, it's just kind of an oozy muck, a goldfish, about 3 inches long, and had some damage to its fins, and he's like, oh, poor guy, and all of a sudden the fish moved. And so Jim ran up to his house and got a glass of water, came down and picked up the fish and dropped it in the water and took it back up to the house, and you could see the gills were moving, but the fish was just kind of, there on the bottom rather than, goldfish, when they die, they just go belly up. So transferred into a larger bowl and checked the next day. The fish's gills were still working. And finally, by the 3rd day, the fish was moving around in the bowl. And and Jim said it just seemed to have an exuberance he had never seen in a goldfish before. He's just thinking like this goldfish, yes, I made it. And so he did decide to rebuild the ponds. And he says one of the first things he did is put that goldfish in the pond. He said, and this fish was just all over the place. And yet, the guy I'm saying Jim is actually James Dillett Freeman. I'm going to have Duncan put up his slide. James Dillett Freeman was a Unity minister. He was known as the poet laureate because he wrote just countless poems, but he also wrote articles and the like. He's the one who wrote the prayer for protection, that we use at the end of the service. Among other things, he wrote a wonderful poem named I Am There, where it just talks about God being everywhere. And it turns out 2 astronauts took it to the moon with them, not realizing that the other astronaut had it as well, but each of them had contacted Jim and told them about it. So when the one astronaut came to visit Jim at Unity Village, Jim had said, both of them brought it up there. So he wrote an article about this experience for Unity magazine. And I got an excerpt from it, I want to read it, but the title of it was A Fish Not Even Gold. What a fuss to make about a fish, you may be saying. A ridiculous coincidence. Well, I realize that I also am such a fish, not even gold. I live in a pond that is also perilous, precarious. It, too, has had many times of freezing and thawing and drying out. And like my fish, I, too, am here. I feel because I have called, and the feet of the world have been no less swift when they ran to feed me. We are all linked to one another. We answer though we have heard no voice. We respond though we do not know we have been summoned. And the universe responds to us with powers you could not think were there, by ways you could not think were there, by ways you had no forethought of, bringing help you could not know would come. Isn't that neat? In those few sentences, though, he posits something that I've considered too, is if we're all connected, could it be that this goldfish that had survived all of that time in the harshest of conditions recognized that he or she was near the end and needed help and sent out a signal, help! And that Jim was sensitive enough to pick up on it and went out there and saved the goldfish. You know, have you had a similar experience where you just had a feeling that you needed to go? A few weeks ago, I had an experience at home. Carla and I had gone to bed, and we were asleep. And about 2 in the morning, I felt on my arm, my upper arm, which was outside the sheet, what felt like Carla had put 2 fingers on me. And I looked at the clock, and it was about 2 in the morning. And I reached over and put my hand on her fingers, and I realized it wasn't Carla's fingers. And I think I recognized what it was that I had my hand around, so I got up, and I walked out towards the door, and I turned on this one light just to double check, and yes, I had a small frog in my hand. And so, I went to the door, and I let him out, and Carla ended up waking up too, and said, "What was that all about?" And I said, "Well, it was a frog." And here you start thinking about, okay, Carla and I do live in a 1-story house, but how did the frog get in? How did the frog know to hop to our bedroom and to hop up onto the bed and hop up onto my exposed arm? Now I'm a softie when it comes to frogs and lizards. I mean, whenever I find them in our house, I catch them and I let them out. And as I've shared before, Carla and I have had many experiences with frogs, especially we have had 2 parrots. Our one parrot, died about this time last year. And the first parrot, each time each one of them died, they sent us a frog. This was, he's actually the last parrot who died. Joey sent us a frog last year, right after she died. But Carla had done a lesson when we were in Hollywood, Florida, back, about 2003, about frog. Fully rely on God. This is being a symbol that you should always fully rely on God. So, what I experienced, what Jim experienced, and what you have probably experienced has actually been scientifically proven, and that is when people or things connect, that they have an influence on each other stronger than the fact that we're all connected in the first place. Scientists have found that when you have 2 atoms that are adjacent to each other, that if you remove them from each other, that if you spin one atom, the other atom spins the same way. And the same thing as far as the composition of the atom and the protons and the electrons and that sort of a thing. That one will change for the other. So there was an experiment in 1978, which was recorded in the book that we're reading by Pam Grout. I'm going to have Duncan put that up. We're reading E² by Pam Grout. Pam goes to the Unity Church up in Lawrence, Kansas, and she came up with this wonderful book of 9 scientific experiments you can use to prove that these spiritual principles are there and that they work. And on page 130 of her book, she said that in 1978 there was an experiment in a teaching hospital in Mexico where they did the EEGs, where they hook up your brain to tell your brain waves and stuff like that. So they had 2 people who knew each other. One was in one room and one was in another room. And in the one room, the person would be looking at a projection screen and they'd have strobe lights going off. And the person in the next room, even though they couldn't see what was going on in the next room, their brain activity was firing like the person in the other room as far as what the strobe lights were. Now, if you weren't here for the previous lessons, it's okay. They all stand on their own. I'm going to have Duncan put up the next slide. So this week, her chapter, experiment number 8, is the 101 Dalmatians experiment. And the concept is that we are connected to everyone and everything else in the universe. Now, most of you are familiar with 101 Dalmatians. If you're not, it was actually written as a novel in London in 1956. It's kind of a children's book. They made an animated film in 1961. I remember seeing that when I was 5 years old. And then, of course, they made a live-action version in 1996 with Glenn Close, playing the antagonist. But the idea behind the book are that this male Dalmatian and this female Dalmatian, and they meet in a park with their owners, or as they call them, their pets, and they fall in love, and so they become a family. And, of course, the two dogs do what these kind of two dogs would do, and had 15 puppies. Well, it turns out there was a person in the neighborhood named Cruella de Vil. Now, of course, in Unity, we like Bible symbolism. So what could the symbolism be of Cruella de Vil? She loved to always wear fur. Everything she wore was fur. And she was fascinated with Dalmatian fur, and she wanted to make a coat out of Dalmatian puppies. So she offered the people a chance to buy her their 15 puppies, and they said, oh, no, not. So she hires two guys to steal the puppies. And it ends up she takes them way out into the country where she has a country house and has them there and is preparing them to be slaughtered. The 101 Dalmatians principle is really related to this one scene, and that is, of course, the puppies have been stolen, the police have checked it out, can't come to any conclusion. So the dogs start to communicate with each other. Now, we've all been out where you hear a dog barking, and then all of a sudden you hear a dog barking over here, and it sure seems like they're talking to each other. Or at least they're reacting to the fact that the other one is reacting to something, right? So in this novel and in this story, they call it the Twilight Bark. It's kind of like the Facebook for dogs. They kind of put out, hey, someone stole our 15 puppies, and then the dog over in the next neighborhood, hey, someone stole 15 puppies. And so it's being transferred out to the ends of London and then out into the countryside, and then way out there there's an old dog. Didn't we see 15 puppies next door, sort of thing? And so they communicate back, and there's all Disney things. And of course, the puppies were saved, and it turns out she had bought other Dalmatian puppies, so there turned out to be a total of 101 Dalmatians that came back rather than just their 15. But the concept is that there is a way for us to communicate. There's a way for us to communicate with animals. Here I was talking about our parrots. Carlos and my parrot, we could always, communicate with each other and know what was going on. In the evening, when it was time for Joey, our parrot, to go to bed, we'd look over at a cage and say, time to go to bed, and she'd go walking, we'd let her out on top of her cage, and she'd go walking, climb into her cage, and go to the perch she liked to sleep on. We knew how to communicate with each other. So, we have a telepathic, intuitive sense. All of us do. Some of us are more awakened than others. I know as Unity has done studies on what kind of personality types are lured to Unity, they find intuitive feelers, are our most prominent personality type. So you're intuitive if you're sitting in Unity. We can sense pleasantness or unpleasantness in others, love or fear. Carl and I, of course, all of the time. It's scary. Because, I'm a Scorpio, so I tend to be much more, quiet. I'll think about something and just mull it over for a little bit, but then I hear it coming out of Carla's mouth. She goes, I was just thinking. Or she'll sense that something's up, and she'll come and find me. It's like, okay, what's up? What are you thinking about? And, so we have that. But even for people who don't know each other well, if you've ever gone to, say, a party or you're in a room, you can tell which people are nervous. You can kind of tell which people like you. You can tell which people don't like you. The key here is, as we're working our way through life and we're having experiences and picking up on other stuff, being willing to kind of go within and ask for guidance. God, show me what I should be doing here. What should I be saying? Or God, show me what I shouldn't be doing here or shouldn't be saying. Just following that guidance, following on that concept of God, show me the good in this situation. Jesus had many lessons, on our connectedness. in the Gospel of Matthew, 18th chapter, 21st verse. Peter came to Jesus and said to him, "Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times?" Jesus said to him, "I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7. There's a lot of symbolism in the numbers of the Bible. The number 7 means completion at the physical world level. And if you put a 0 after it, it means as long as it takes to get there. So yeah, there are times where somebody will do something that is against my preferences. And I have to forgive them. But I don't feel like I have forgiven them very well at that first day or that first moment or first thought of forgiveness. But I stick with it. And here again, God showed me the good in this. And suddenly I start to see, oh, okay. They're doing the best that they can. There are very few Cruella de Vils out there in the world. In reality, everybody's doing the best they can with the information they've got at the time. In the letter to the Ephesians, 4th chapter, 31st verse, Paul writes, "Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander and malice be put away from you. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another." In the 1990s, Carl and I were traveling around doing prosperity seminars at all the Unity churches. We came here in January 1992. That's how we became aware of Unity of Tampa. And as we were traveling around, we were just kind of like, where could we see ourselves serving as a church someday? And this was one of those churches that's like, yeah, I could see that. But during the 1990s, Shirley MacLaine, the actress, started writing books about her spiritual experiences and that she believed in UFOs and all of that. And in one of her books, she talked about, as being a famous person, what she learned was you get slapped with a lot of frivolous lawsuits. And she would settle most of them, but then she got this one lawsuit slapped on her that really ticked her off. I was like, no, I'm not going to settle with this guy. Forget it. We'll take it to court. And she was just kind of seething about this whole thing. And then court day came. And that morning, she just had this feeling, oh, wow, look at how wrapped up I got in this. She had these spiritual realizations about how she was making this person the enemy, and that she was attached to, her sense of what was right and wrong. And so she realized she just needed to shift her attitude to express forgiveness. So she expressed forgiveness, and she sent really good energy, to this other person and all that. And they got to the courthouse, and the lawyer from the plaintiff came to Shirley's lawyer and says, we want to settle. And so the lawyer's like, well, okay. But turns out he asked for a pittance compared to what he originally asked for. And so Shirley was kind of like, well, isn't that interesting? I shifted my attitude. He shifted his attitude, and they settled. But it's a good example of that. If we set out that energy that if we're going to resist, we will get resistance at the other end. The old idiom that you can't have a tug of war if someone lets go of one end of the rope. So are you willing to let go of your end of the rope and say, God, show me the goodness? In 1972, at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, a scientist named Edward Lorenz talked about something that he had observed, and that was that even sometimes the smallest effort or the smallest thing that we do can affect a much larger population. And he gave the example of what if in Brazil a butterfly flaps its wings and starts air and wind motions, and suddenly, a few days later, there's a hurricane approaching Texas. And the nickname for it became the butterfly effect. It became part of the world's lexicon, the butterfly effect. That sometimes something we seem to be doing seems just so insignificant, and yet it can have a change. A thought that we send out, or doing kindness to one person, allows that person to go out and be kind to several other people that day, and so on, and so on, and so on. And we've all heard stories of, toll booths or at Starbucks where, someone pays for the person behind them. How that effect happens. So recognize the effect that you have on the people around you and the world around you. I'm going to have Duncan put up our next slide. So the experiment number 8, 101 Dalmatians. Pam Grant, the author, says, can I send a message without being in that person's presence? Can I send a message without being in this person's presence? So if during the next 2 days I telepathically send a specific message to a specific person, I will get evidence that he or she received it. So number 1, choose your target. Choose someone you have met, you've shaken their hand, or you've touched them in some way, because that, like I say, enhances the connection. Then choose what kind of action or response you want. Be specific and clear about your agenda. Number 3, place your target in front of your mind's eye. Imagination, use your imagination. Just picture that person getting the message, or just you communicating with the person face to face, even though you're not face to face. Be with your target by embodying and experiencing that connection, which is kind of related to that too. There are some times where a thought or a feeling is even more effective than the spoken word. Charles Fillmore wrote about this before his death, that as time went by, he recognized the power of the spoken word, but he also recognized that sometimes a silent prayer can be just as or more effective. And then number 5, shower your target with good thoughts. Send them incomparable results, as she wrote in the book. Put that energy out there. So just think it through. Recognize what you believe is in the realm of possibility. You know, I was reading on Friday that the actress Charlize Theron was promoting a new movie, and she was saying how frustrated she is that for 2 years nobody's asked her out on a date. You know, so I thought, well, if I were to send a message to Charlize Theron and she called me, what would be the odds that she called me? But then I thought, well, it really wouldn't matter because Carla would kill me anyway, so. So if during the next 48 hours I telepathically send a specific message to a specific person, I will get evidence that he or she received it. So note your start time and expect a response. Now, as I mentioned, it should be someone you've had physical contact with. And our video story today to close is from Michelle Miller of the CBS Evening News.
In New Jersey, state troopers pull over dozens of cars a year. But one last month stands out because that chance encounter led to a surprise reunion 27 years in the making. Michelle Miller has the extraordinary story.
How's it going today? I'm all right, thank you. New Jersey State Police, license, registration, insurance card.
With his body cam rolling, Trooper Michael Patterson pulled over a white BMW for what he thought was a routine traffic stop.
I grew up in Piscataway.
After some small talk, retired police officer Matthew Bailey realized they were from the same neighborhood and had crossed paths before, thanks to the trooper's mom.
I was in labor and didn't realize it. Before you know it, I'm on the bed and Michael's head is crowning.
Every birthday, Michael's mother recounted the story of how an officer helped his dad deliver him at home.
Years ago, it was the first baby I delivered was that house. That's why I always remember the address.
At the house?
In the bedroom. Oh yeah, by myself.
That was me. That was me.
Get the hell
That was me.
I'm like, wow, is this really happening right now? I just extended my hand. I said, sir, that was me. That was me. My name is Michael Patterson. It's a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for helping deliver me.
So this is the home where Michael was born and raised.
Matthew, Michael, and his mom had a chance to return to the scene of his birth 27 years later.
What was going through your mind?
At that point, I didn't have any children of my own. I had never seen it, experienced it, and I was just trying to recall academy days of my training.
They train in the academy for this?
A brief segment, much too brief.
Yeah.
Everybody asks why I don't get so upset. I get upset because I honestly don't know what would have happened had they not come to my aid. So I just want to tell Mr. Bill I appreciate him coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
To my aid.
It was my pleasure. Great experience.
Michelle Miller, CBS News, New Jersey.
From the Bible, the letter to the Ephesians, 4th chapter. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, and be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another. and may you always be open to God's guidance and grace.